Every episode is a paranormal road trip where the GPS stopped working 5 minutes in.
If it bumps in the night or lurks in your basement, we probably already talked about it.
We're best friends, lifelong weirdos, and your guides through the haunted, the spooky, and the just plain cursed.
From cryptids to cursed objects, haunted history to haunted hairbrushes.
And probably a haunted dollar, too, along the way.
This is Not My Ghost, Not My Problem. Subscribe now.
Regret it later.
Blame the ghost.
Before we begin, we want to acknowledge that Down the Crooked Path is researched and recorded in Niagara Falls, Ontario, on the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabe, and the Attawandaron, and the Mississauga of Credit First. This land has been home to Indigenous peoples for thousands of years, and we recognize their enduring connection. We are grateful to share these stories on their lands that carry their histories, and we encourage our listeners to reflect on the past, present, and future of the land they call home. Welcome, wanderers, to Journey Down the Crooked Path, a place where the stories are stranger, the shadows stretch longer, and the things that go bump in the night might just be listening. I'm Amanda Joy, your guide into the eerie, the forgotten, and the downright bizarre. Here, we step off the well-lit roads of Canadian creepies and venture into the murky corners of history, folklore, and the unexplained, where the whispers grow louder and the truth is never quite what it seems. So let's take a deep breath, watch your step, and whatever you do, don't look back. Once you start down the crooked path, you never know what might follow.
In 17th century Europe, a fear moved across the land like a plague, filling courtrooms with accusations of witchcraft. Formal persecutions were carried out with the utmost belief that this is what would protect their communities from something real and encroaching. This was an age when the supernatural wasn't tucked into folklore or superstition. Rather, it sat at the center of everyday life. A diabolical pact wasn't an outlandish idea like it is today. It was a threat people believed could be signed in the dark of a barn or in the corner of a kitchen. Maleficum harm was done through hidden means. It was treated as seriously as any physical crime, and possession? That wasn't a rare spectacle. It was a possibility that hovered over households, especially those already strained by illness or grief. The clergy weren't simply preaching sermons. Many were trained in demonology, studying thick manuals that claimed to decode the devil's strategies. The Malleus Maleficarum circulated widely, its pages offering step-by-step guidance on identifying witches. French Jesuit scholars added their own treatise, layering theology with warnings about spiritual infiltration. These texts shaped how priests questioned suspects, how magistrates interpreted confessions, and how entire villages understood misfortune. And beneath all of this ran a deeper fear that witchcraft wasn't just an assault on faith, but on the fragile order that had held communities together. A failed harvest, a sick child, a sudden death. Any of it could be interpreted as evidence that the world was slipping out of alignment. Authorities would respond with trials meant to restore balance, even if the cost was a human life, an innocent one at that. Into this atmosphere, heavy, watchful, and convinced of its own righteousness, that is where the Barb Halle story unfolds. When Europeans crossed the Atlantic and carved out the first settlements of New France, what we now call Quebec, they didn't leave their beliefs behind. They carried them across the ocean like luggage that couldn't be set down. Ideas about witchcraft, demonic influence, and spiritual dangers traveled with them. But the world they stepped into didn't behave the way Europe had taught them it should. Life in the colonies felt precarious. Everything familiar, language, customs, the rhythm of the seasons, was suddenly distant. The wilderness pressed in from every direction, vast and unmapped. filled with sounds and shadows that didn't match any stories that they had grown up with. Isolation shaped the colony's imagination. Winters arrived with severity that stunned newcomers, locking them into small wooden structures where illness spread quickly, and help was often days away. Medical knowledge was limited, and when a fever rose or a child convulsed, explanations narrowed to what people already understood: spiritual assaults, hidden malice, forces acting just beyond sight. European settlers also encountered indigenous spiritual practices that they didn't recognize: ceremonies, healing rituals, and cosmologies that guided communities here for generations were misinterpreted through a European lens, flattened into something threatening, something aligned with the supernatural dangers that they already feared. Misunderstanding became a spark, and the fear did the rest. New France quickly became a place where old European anxieties fused with the pressures of survival in unfamiliar land. And in that fusion, witchcraft found a new ground to take root. In the early decades of New France, the entire colony held fewer than 2,000 people. Quebec City itself was barely a village, its population hovering under 800. Life unfolded in close quarters where every illness, every argument, every unexplained sound in the night felt magnified by the sheer smallness of the world around you. The church stood at the center of that world. Jesuit missionaries and Ursuline nuns shaped not only the religious practices, but the moral expectations that governed everyday life. They believed the colony was a spiritual frontier as much as a physical one, and they watched for signs of danger with a vigilance sharpened by their training. What they witnessed, they recorded. The Jesuits wrote detailed annual reports, while the Ursulines kept careful correspondences with their communities in France. Any hint of spiritual disturbances, such as visions or unexplained illness, strange behaviors, that was all preserved in ink. These letters became the earliest written accounts of supernatural events in what would become Canada, capturing the fears and the interpretations of a colony still trying to understand the land that it was occupying. Among the voices that survived from those early years, none is more revealing than Marie de l'Incarnation. Her letters to her son form one of the richest archives of New France, a window into a world still finding its shape. She wrote with a clarity that makes the past feel close, as if she were standing beside you, describing the colony as it unfolded around her. Nothing was too small or too complex for her to record. She wrote about political tensions that rippled through the settlement, weather that could shift from gentle to punishing without warning, and the intricate relationships between the French settlers and the indigenous nations. She described the rhythms of daily life inside the Ursuline Covenant, the challenges of teaching young girls, and the spiritual anxieties that threaded throughout the colony. Marie de l'Incarnation's correspondence offers some of the earliest written descriptions of supernatural fears in New France. In one letter, she described unsettling phenomenon witnessed across the colony: strange voices in the air, unexplained sounds, and visions that left the entire community uneasy. She wrote of, quote, disturbing voices in the air, and even a fiery canoe in the sky, events that she treated seriously enough to report them to her son. The fiery canoe appeared alongside the voices she described as part of a sequence of events that left people searching for meaning in a landscape where they were still learning to understand it. Witnesses spoke of a bright shape crossing the sky. The image of a canoe became the closest comparison that they could reach for. Marie passed the account to her son with the same clarity that she used for the political news or daily challenges, treating it as one of the more realities of life in New France. The voices that she mentions are just as eerie. They weren't tied to a single location or person. And the Jesuit reports from around the same time period compared experiences, noting fiery shapes in the air and sounds that seemed to move above the settlement. Marie's letter fits with the broader record, reflecting how these events were understood by those who lived through them. She wrote that it was discovered that there are sorcerers and magicians in this country. Marie's correspondences eventually turned towards a case that would mark a turning point in the colony's spiritual history. She wrote of Barb Halle, a young woman whose suffering drew the attention of priests, nuns, and magistrates alike. And through these letters, she would record accidentally the colony's first case of demonic possession. In 1658, a small group of passengers aborted the Saint Andre, sailing across the Atlantic to join the colony of New France. Aboard the cramped vessel was Barb Halle, a young teenage girl, and a man named Daniel Woolley. The voyage was long, the ship crowded, and the weeks at sea forced passengers into close proximity. It was during this crossing that Daniel began to make advances towards Barb. The records are clear on one essential point. She rejected him. Once anchored, Barb and her family moved near the St. Lawrence River, settling in the South Shore in the small, scattered communities of Lausanne. Barb was still young when she began working in service, moving between households that needed an extra pair of hands. She lived in the same routine of the countless other girls in the colony, long hours with strict expectations, and the watchful presence of the church shaping every corner of her life. As Barb settled into her work, the community around her remained small enough that every sound, every illness, every unexplained moment became part of shared knowledge. People lived close and they listened closely. So when Barb began experiencing periods of unwellness, episodes that left her shaking, exhausted, or frightened, the neighbors noticed. They heard noises in the night. They saw objects shift or fall without any clear cause. They watched her struggle through fits and visions that she couldn't explain. And because this is New France, where the supernatural was woven into the fabric of daily interpretation, the community didn't see these events as random misfortunes, and they looked for a source. They looked at Daniel. Reports from this time state that Barb saw him in her visions, that his image appeared to her in moments of distress. To the people of Lausanne, that connection mattered. A rejected advances on the ship, a young woman falling into episodes that no one could explain, and a miller whose presence just seemed to be burned into her mind. In a colony shaped by Jesuit teachings and constant warnings about spiritual danger, these pieces fit together with an unsettling ease. And while the community tried to understand what was happening, Marie de l'Incarnation was writing.
You. Yeah, you. Still haunting the same old fast fashion? Time to dig up something better with Back from the Dead Goods, a Canadian small business where forgotten threads get a second life and sustainability meets spooky. This isn't just upcycled clothing, it's resurrected fashion with an eerie edge. Handpicked, reworked, and revived, every piece is as unique as a ghost story whispered at midnight. And because you're a part of the Canadian Creepies family, you get an exclusive deal. Use code Canadian Creepies at checkout for 10% off. Find them lurking on Instagram, Etsy, and Poshmark. Links are in the episode description. Give your wardrobe a second chance at life, if you dare. Looking for your next obsession? The Creators Collective Podcasts is your gateway to the dark, the chilling, and the downright fascinating. We're a community of independent podcasts with one goal: to share the best in true crime, paranormal tales, folklore, and unexplained mysteries. Whether you crave cold cases that won't stay closed, haunted histories that refuse to be forgotten, or stories that make you sleep with the lights on, there's a show waiting for you in the collective. And when you join us, you're not just listening to one podcast. You're stepping into a world of creators who love this stuff as much as you do. Check out the Creators Collective today. Follow the link in our show notes to discover your next favorite podcast. We'll be waiting for you. Let's take a moment during this break to talk about something that matters. Something that doesn't get to be background noise. The Anishinaabe-Moan word, Nikinagana, means we are all related, and we are. But relationship isn't just about words, it's about responsibility. Canadian author Naomi Klein once said, "It is not enough to say that we live on Indigenous land. We have to act as if we do." And one way to do that is by supporting Pay Your Rent, a grassroots mutual aid initiative that offers direct material support to Indigenous organizers across this land. It's not charity, it's rent. For those of us who aren't Indigenous to this place, it's a way to show up differently, to redistribute some of what's been taken. The Pay Your Rent Fund started as a one-time request for help in 2018 and grew into a nonprofit called Nikinagana. Your monthly or one-time donation can help provide food, hygiene supplies, housing support, and resources for Indigenous-led resistance and community care. So if you've ever said, "We're all related," ask yourself, are you being a good relative? Visit payyourrent.ca and find out more about how you can be part of something better. Now, back to this case.
When she wrote to her son about the unrest moving through the colony, she mentioned a young girl who had been seduced on a ship by a man who was a magician. And the man in question? David Vooley. He was someone that she believed carried influences far darker than misconduct. Marie described Barb as afflicted and tormented, and she made it clear that the source of the torment was not imagined. She wrote that the devil acted through the malice of that man, framing Barb as not someone who was unstable or sinful, but as a girl caught in the crosshairs of a spiritual attack rooted in the events of that fateful voyage. To her, Barb's suffering was part of a larger pattern. It was evidence that the colony was under spiritual pressure and that invisible forces were acting. The danger was not theoretical but present, immediate, and it was unfolding in real time. In the lagoon, in that small house near the river, Barb Halle was becoming the center of a very disturbances that Marie believed were reshaping the spiritual landscape of New France. Once Barb's condition worsened, the small settlement of Lausanne could no longer contain the fear or the responsibility of caring for her. The disturbances around her, the fits, the visions, the unexplained movements from inside the home, pushed the community to seek help from the only institution in New France equipped to handle something that they believed was both physical and spiritual. And so Barb was taken across the river to Quebec, to Hôtel Dieu Hospital, where the Augustine nuns tended to the sick. The hospital was one of the earliest in North America, a place where medicine and faith were inseparable. The sisters treated fever and injuries and childbirth, but they also confronted what they believed were assaults from invisible worlds. Barb arrived as a patient who needed both of these types of care. The nuns recorded all of the episodes. Not only that, but they prayed over her. They watched her through the night, and they tried to soothe her body while addressing what they believed was happening to her soul. But the hospital was not the only part of her treatment. Barb was also brought to the Ursuline Convent, where sisters specialized in spiritual instruction and moral discipline. The Ursulines had already begun writing about the colony's supernatural unrest, and Barb's arrival placed her directly at the center of their concerns. She was brought in for observation, and the spiritual care the Ursulines believed could reach the cause of her suffering. It is here in the Ursuline Convent that she is given nightly exorcisms. The nuns pray over her every single night. An attempt to free Halle of these demonic spirits, the nuns and the priests chant prayers of deliverance. They sprinkle her with holy water. They invoke the saints. They read scriptures aloud. They perform liturgical formulas meant to confront and expel the presence that they believed was afflicting her. The Ursulines noted that Barb's condition shifted from day to day. Some nights, she was calm enough to rest. Other nights, she fell into fits that left the sisters convinced they were witnessing something beyond the illness. They kept her under close watch, sometimes bringing her into the Covenant for extended periods when her symptoms were intensified. Through all of this, the priests of Quebec, Jesuit trained to confront spiritual danger, worked alongside the nuns. They examined her and prayed over her and documented what they were seeing. Their records, combined with the notes of Hotel Dieu and the Ursulines, form the backbone of what we know about Barb's treatment. From the moment Barb Halle began describing her visions, one name kept surfacing: Daniel Woolley. Barb told the priests and the nuns that the figure tormenting her wasn't a stranger, wasn't a demon acting on its own. She said the forces attacking her had been sent, and she named Daniel as the person behind the attacks. Now, for the community, that accusation didn't come out of nowhere. Daniel arrived in New France already carrying a complicated spiritual identity. He had boarded the St. Andre as a Protestant, only converting to Catholicism during the voyage, a conversion the Jesuits later described as shallow, insincere, and quickly abandoned once he reached land. And this mattered deeply in the colony where Catholicism wasn't just religion, it was also law and the backbone to their social order. The Jesuits and the civil authorities began to describe him as many unsavory things, such as a relapsed heretic, a blasphemer, a profouner of the sacrament. A convert who slipped back into Protestant habits wasn't just a spiritual suspect, but he was considered to be socially dangerous as well. And Daniel didn't stop there. After settling near Quebec City, Daniel took up work as a miller, a position that gave him access to trade networks and to the indigenous communities who lived and traveled along the St. Lawrence. And it's here that he crossed a line no one in New France was allowed to cross. Daniel began illegally selling alcohol to the indigenous people. And this wasn't a minor offense. This was one of the most aggressively persecuted crimes in the colony. By 1660, Bishop Laval had issued a sweeping decree. Anyone who gave alcohol to the indigenous people was automatically excommunicated. The church believed alcohol caused harm, disorder, and violence in indigenous communities, and that the French traders were exploiting that vulnerability for profit. The civil authorities agreed. Governor de Argenson punished offenders harshly, and the church backed him with spiritual penalties. So, when Daniel ignored the church and the state and continued to trade anyways, he wasn't just breaking the law, he was defying the entire moral structure of New France. And he did it repeatedly. The records would describe him as incorrigible, someone who refused to stop even after warnings, punishments, and imprisonment. And so, when Barb Halle claimed he used witchcraft to torment her, the colony believed her and the authorities didn't hesitate. He was accused of using diabolical arts to harm Barb, malus caefarum, meant to harm body and spirit at the same time, witchcraft, and consorting with the devil. But when it came to the formal charges, the state focused on something else entirely. According to the Dictionary of Canadian Biography, Daniel Woolley was charged officially with the following: trafficking alcohol to indigenous people. However, the records are very unclear as to what it was that he was actually found guilty for, as there are also reports involving his relapse as a heretic. Regardless of what he was found guilty for, on October 7th, 1661, Daniel was executed by firing squad. This was extremely rare, as the formal charge to trafficking alcohol required excommunication. And neither was the punishment of execution for witchcraft. Regardless, most historians note that Daniel was the only person in New France to be executed in a case with connection to sorcery. So after the accusations against Daniel were finally settled, you'd think that Barb Halle her story would quiet down, but it didn't, not right away. She was still experiencing violent fits and had reoccurring episodes of convulsions and visions, and then the records just stop. There's no final diagnosis, no triumphant declaration that she had been healed. Nothing. And the silence? That's exactly where the legends start. Because depending on who you ask, Barb Halle was cured in one of two very different and, honestly, very unsettling ways. One version says that the priest brought out a relic, a rib bone, something said to have belonged to a saint, sometimes described as holy. According to this story, the bone was pressed against Barb's body during a final ritual. The moment it touched her, the fit stopped. Her voice cleared, her eyes focused, and the demon, the one said to have been sent by Daniel, was gone. The other version is darker and far stranger. In this telling, the nuns at Hotel Dieu or the Ursuline Convent, stories disagree on which, Barb is placed inside a heavy cloth sack, a literal sack. They stitch it closed around her, leaving only a small opening so she could breathe. The idea wasn't to restrain her, more to trap the demon with her, to force it out through confinement, prayer, and pressure. The sisters prayed over the bag, they sprinkled holy water, they recited formulas meant to drive out whatever it was inside, and when they finally opened it, Barb was calm. She was quiet. She was herself again. Now here's the thing. None of these cures appear in official documents. Not in the Jesuit relations, not in the covenant records. Perhaps people just needed to make sense of what happened to her, because the truth is that after the final mentions in the hospital and the covenant records, Barb Halle just disappears. There's no confirmed marriage records or burial entry, no children. But in folklore, she lives a little longer. Some versions say that she recovered, married, and lived into her 50s, that she died quietly in the 1690s. But historians are clear. That woman was someone else with the same name, but a different Barb entirely. The real Barb, the girl at the center of one of the strangest possession cases in New France, she just fades into silence. And the colony filled that silence with whatever stories helped them to sleep at night. While Barb Halle's story was fading out of the corners of New France, something much bigger was building across the ocean. In Europe, that very fear that had ignited Barb's case was about to explode. Within a generation, the entire region would be swept up in the witch trials. Communities would turn on their neighbors. Women would be accused, examined, and condemned for what people believed they could do. So when you look back at Barb's story with that in mind, it feels less like an isolated possession story and more like an early tremor, a warning. A moment when fear and faith collided in a way that would soon become terrifyingly familiar. Because what happened to her, the fits, the exorcisms, the accusations, the need to find someone to blame, those same patterns were about to repeat themselves on a massive scale, not a small riverside settlement, but across entire countries. Barb Halle didn't live to see the witch trials that swept through Europe, but her story sits right on the edge of that history, close enough to feel the heat of it, but far enough that she became a legend instead of a headline.